I'm Ken Stevens, the historian and curator at the College Football Hall of Fame, welcoming you to another edition of Inside the Vault. One of the terms that people often hear when they think about college football history is the flying wedge, but not too many people really understand how the flying wedge really worked and when it was and what the whole play was really about. College football in the 19th century was vastly different than it is today, and if you ever see film of college football at that period, it's almost unrecognizable to what we see today because the rules were so different, in which they were able to then employ much different strategies. So let's talk a little bit about the flying wedge. The flying wedge was really only in effect for a little over one season. In 1892, Harvard was about to play Yale in their annual big game, and in the start of the second half, Harvard was going to be kicking off. And in those days, you didn't always have to kick to the other team. You could actually keep the ball yourself. So what Harvard did was they employed a play that was designed by a fellow by the name of Loren DeLand. Loren DeLand had no experience in football whatsoever. In fact, he had not even seen a college football game until 2 years previously in 1890. DeLand was an expert in military tactics and in chess. And so he used these military principles to design this play for Harvard. And what he tried to do was use what was known as mass momentum and bringing a lot of people and speed to one area against a smaller group from the other team. So let me show you how the flying wedge actually worked. As I said, you didn't actually have to kick the ball to the other team. So you had a fellow here who would initiate the play, and he would nudge the ball backwards with his foot and then pick it up, and he would throw it to this fellow over here. Now on this side of the line, you had the faster members of the Harvard team, and these would be the slower members, the bigger and slower members of the Harvard team. They would then run down the field preceding the ball carrier, and the faster members would then come on this side, on the opposite side of the ball, and then catch up to the larger members, and they would form a wedge. And they would then attack just one point in the opposing line. Like I say, that was the final game of the 1892 season, and so then teams started adopting it for the 1893 season. Well, obviously the play was a very dangerous play to do, and a lot of people got hurt, and so it was made illegal after one season. The way teams would combat that play was sort of interesting, but you really couldn't confront it head on very well. So they would sort of wait till the wedge went by, and then they would come around and tackle the ball carrier behind. Or what some teams did, they would form their own wedge, and two wedges would actually collide. So you can imagine the amount of injuries that would happen with such a play. Where we're going to go to next, we're going to show you some of the pieces of equipment that were used at that point in 19th century football, and you can understand just from this type of play and from the type of equipment that they used why there were so many injuries in the 19th century. We were talking about how the flying wedge worked. Now we're going to show you an actual piece of equipment that was designed specifically for the flying wedge. You know, as the group would gather together in the wedge formation, they wanted to keep it a very tight formation to help go down the field and trample over the opposing team, so to speak. So they came up with a flying wedge belt. And what exactly it was, a guy took an actual belt and then took a couple of suitcase handles, as you can see, and then riveted it to the belt. And so the players would then wear the belt, and they would grab a hold of these little handles, and so they would actually be able to grab a hold of one another and keep the formation very tight using a flying wedge harness or a flying wedge belt. One of the other things, back in that era, there were no helmets. The first helmet was developed in that year of 1893 by a Navy player by the name of Joe Reeves. He went to an Annapolis shoemaker, and the shoemaker built him a helmet. Reeves was told by a doctor that the reason he needed some sort of head protection was that if he got kicked in the head again, it would cause instant insanity, which I thought was a very odd neurological term of the day, but that's what he was told. And so the shoemaker designed a helmet for him. Some of the other players were wearing a thing called a Morel nose mask, which was a hard rubber piece that they would clench together in their teeth. Underneath there's a little piece where you hold it with your teeth, and then this would go around, the strap would go around the back of your head. Those were popular for a very short period of time. And eventually commercially made helmets were manufactured. The problem with the commercially manufactured helmets was, as you can see in this piece here, is really just a bit of a padding that is sitting on the top of your head. Your head was really not shielded from the shell of the helmet. That didn't develop until 1917 or so, when the first suspension helmets were created, and suspension helmets were really the state of the art for all helmets for 70 years until the mid 1980s. So that's sort of our look at 19th century tactics and 19th century protective equipment. And so from seeing that, I'm sure you can understand why the game of college football was so dangerous at this period of time.
Guys, where else would you rather be?